just for those of you who couldn't make it to the in-person open house, we just wanted to say that we're sorry we weren't able to have these conversations in person, but everyone's still welcome to reach out by phone or email if you have questions after the presentation. And we're just doing our best to keep the community safe and abide by the public health order around events at this time. So without further ado, I will pass this off to Andrea Picard, and she's going to provide an overview of this project.
Great. Hello, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay? So thank you for your interest in this project. Today, as Britt mentioned, we'd like to highlight key amendments proposed to the land use bylaw as part of the residential infill and densification project. However, should you be interested in further details, we invite you to explore the information posted to the website and follow up with staff if you have any questions. Input on this project can be emailed to csanage.ca, and the project webpage and more information can be found on the website at csanage.ca. As most of us are aware, housing affordability in our region has continued to be an ongoing concern, while housing options within the district remain somewhat limited. In 2018, Council initiated the Residential Infill and Densification Project to implement policies, guidelines, and regulations that would foster desirable residential infill in neighborhoods and densification of our village centers in a manner that is sensitive to the character of Central Saanich. The project looked at accessory dwelling units in the form of cottages or carriage houses, small lots, panhandle lots, duplexes, pocket neighborhoods, and small-scale multi-unit developments up to 8 units. This graph shows the project phases, and at this point in the project, the objective is to amend the land use bylaw to introduce zoning regulations that support the new policies. Through earlier phases of this project, the official community plan was amended with new housing policies and to adopt new design guidelines for infill developments. What this means is that now, with these design guidelines in place, much of the infill development we see in the district would require a development permit to be approved by council. It may be helpful to explain that by infill development, we mean small incremental developments within existing neighborhoods that increase density slightly without changing the overall character of an area. There have been 2 comprehensive housing reports completed that provide new housing data. One was completed earlier as part of this project, and one was just presented to council last week. And this was completed to fill new provincial regulations that require local governments to complete detailed housing needs reports every 5 years. For the next few slides, I'll touch on some of the key findings of those studies. Our population growth is expected to continue at less than 1% annually, which is slightly less than the CRD regionally. Population demographics indicate that we have an aging population with 42% in the 55 plus age range versus 34% 10 years previous and 36% in the CRD. There's a higher proportion of single-family dwellings in Central Saanich, resulting in less housing diversity. In summary, this means pressures on housing supply will continue, an aging population will change our housing needs, and we need more diversity to provide a range of housing options based on household needs. Of course, housing supply is one thing, but that itself does not address affordability. When evaluating housing needs, there are 3 basic housing indicators that are used. Is it affordable, or will shelter costs be less than 30% or less of income? Is it suitable, or does the size of household and number of bedrooms fit with the household needs? And is it adequate, or does it have any major repairs required? The affordability indicator is the one most often at issue. The reports show that in Central Saanich, 9% of households are in a core housing need, which compares to 14% regionally. Core housing needs mean that their housing does not meet one of the indicators and that they would need to spend more than 30% of their household income to meet a median rent of an acceptable housing if it was available. Of those in core housing need, 5% are in core need and 4% are in extreme need, which means they currently spend 50% or more of their income on housing costs. In Central Saanich, 19% of households are spending more than 30% of their income on shelter costs, but renter households are more affected, with 43% of renters being in unaffordable houses compared to 13% of owner-occupied households. While projections may estimate the numbers and types of households needed in the future, a similar analysis of the land available for potential development evaluates our housing capacity. But the amount of housing that will actually get constructed is driven by the applications we receive, which in part indicate the economic conditions and a property owner's interest to develop their land. For supportive housing, such as affordable, seniors, or assisted living, government funding is a key driver. And more generally, at the local government level, the OCP policies guide the density and types of housing proposals that are supported by council. Conversely, housing demand will continue to be driven by population growth, changing demographics and vulnerable populations requiring more household options, and in our region particularly, more affordable housing options. Early in this project, a land capacity analysis was completed, which concluded that, based on the policies and zoning, there is potential for 875 dwelling units within the urban settlement area. However, the forecasted need is 1,250. While Therefore, a shortfall of 375 dwelling units is anticipated by 2036. In reality, housing potential would be less than stated due to unknown development constraints and lack of interest by property owners to develop a property. The more recent report identified that within the next 5 years, there would be a need for 557 household units. To increase housing supply in a manner that is compatible with the community and continues to protect our rural and agricultural land base, new housing policies were adopted that support a range of infill developments as well as densification within the core areas of Sanishton Village and Brentwood Bay Village. When the land capacity analysis was retested using the new policies, the results indicated that we could meet our housing needs while maintaining the integrity of the urban settlement area boundary and therefore continue to protect our rural and agricultural landscape. Again, that total of 2,800 shown when the new policies were tested would be an overestimation, as many potential developments may never occur or they may not develop at the maximum density. Other key findings in the reports included that Central Saanich has high home ownership rates at 80%, which is compared to about 63% at the CRD. Vacancy rates remain low at 0.6%, where the preferred rate is closer to 3%. The median income in Central Saanich is higher than the CRD, but the disparity between renters and owners is significant, with renters having half the household income compared to owners. On average, to purchase an affordable single-family home, a household income of $150,000 is required, and there is a lack of housing options available. The report identified that the most pressing local housing needs as more affordable housing, rental housing, housing specifically for persons with disabilities, seniors, and families, and also that homelessness remains a significant challenge regionally. Other identified needs included housing for First Nations, newcomers to Canada, and women fleeing violence. So what did the new policies that Council approved included? They support detached accessory dwelling units as an alternative to a suite within the main house in the form of a one-story cottage in the urban areas, and this would be on those R-zoned residential lots. Similarly, supporting a cottage or two-story carriage house on rural lands outside of the settlement area, and that would apply to the RE-zoned lots. Within the urban settlement area, support a range of infill scenarios, including small lots, duplexes, pocket neighborhoods, and small-scale multifamily up to 8 units. The policies also identify that Panhandle Lots are not the preferred form of development, but they are not outright excluded. For densification, new policies support up to 5-story buildings in the village core areas of Brentwood Bay and Sanishton, and taller buildings if a significant community amenity is included, such as affordable housing. And support increased density for multifamily housing along main travel corridors close to the services and public transit, which could be in the form of townhouses or apartments up to 4 stories. These corridors have been identified on the land use plan that you'll see in one moment. But overall, many policies remain unchanged, with new development limited to within the urban settlement area and protection of our agriculture and rural lands base being a top priority. In case you're not familiar with the land use plan, this map shows the areas in the district that are considered urban or rural lands. The black heavy line is the urban settlement area boundary, which includes residential neighborhoods in Brentwood Bay, Sanishton, the Keating Tanner Ridge neighborhood, and the Turgoose area. Most lands outside of the urban settlement area boundary are within the provincial agricultural land reserves and zone agriculture, and those are shown in the bright green, or our rural lands shown in the pale green, and those are the properties that are zoned RE and are found in a number of rural pockets throughout the district. The pink lines at the village edges or at key crossroads are the travel corridors where it's identified for moderate level of densification. In addition to the policies, Council has approved new design guidelines specifically applicable to infill developments that are 8 units or less. With the design guidelines in place, new infill developments within the urban settlement area would require a development permit to be approved by Council. The design guidelines are based on 5 fundamental principles and cover 6 main aspects of development, which should ensure that new developments are sensitive to the neighborhood context and potential impacts are minimal. While most new infill development would be subject to the new guidelines, larger housing developments or any commercial development would remain subject to the existing multifamily commercial mixed-use development permit guidelines. So that covers the project to date, and now we'd like to highlight the key amendments proposed to the land use bylaws as project moves forward. Some of the amendments are new regulations specific to infill, as well as some housekeeping amendments to resolve other issues or improve clarity in the bylaw. During this project, we heard that allowing accessory cottages as an alternative to a suite was well supported by the community. These type of dwelling units are accessory to a principal dwelling and cannot be subdivided in any way. Within the R and RE zones, the land use bylaw would now list accessory dwelling units as a permitted use instead of secondary suite. And accessory dwelling units is defined as including secondary suites, 1-story cottages, or 2-story carriage houses. An exception to this is the R1Z and RE5 zones, since they currently do not allow for secondary suites, and that would remain the same. For R-zoned properties within the urban areas, the proposed regulations allow for a 1-story cottage. The size of the cottage permitted is based on a lot coverage of 10% up to a maximum floor area that is based on the zone. Those zones requiring a larger lot area, such as the R1 and the R2, would allow a cottage up to 70 square meters, which is roughly 750 square feet. For mid-size zones, it would be 50 square meters, and with the smallest R1XS zone, it would be 45 square meters. For suites within the house, that remains the same at 90 square meters. And as is now, suites within the main house can be 90 square meters. The proposed regulations allow for additional density, but only for a cottage. The existing regulations that currently apply to the principal dwelling and accessory building are unaffected. If and when the provincial the provincial building code addresses tiny homes, they would be considered like a cottage. On larger RE zone lots outside of the urban settlement area, regulations would allow a 1-story cottage or a 2-story carriage house. On rural lots, the permitted size of a secondary suite, cottage, or carriage house is 90 square meters. Within the RE zone, there's also a maximum separation of 50 meters proposed from the principal dwelling to the carriage house to encourage less land disturbance across a property and reduce impacts to neighbors. However, the regulations would allow for repurposing of an existing accessory building as a carriage house, even if it is more than 50 meters from the main dwelling. And constructing a carriage house on rural lands would not require a development permit. Another housing typology reviewed during the project included duplexes. Duplexes are currently allowed on larger lots under the R2 zone, which is predominantly found in Brentwood Bay. Currently, to be allowed a duplex, the lot must be 920 square meters in area with a 26-meter wide lot frontage. The proposed regulations would reduce the size requirement to 800 square meters for a duplex. This would allow around 120 lots to potentially have a duplex without requiring a rezoning application. However, approval of a variance for lot frontage would be required for many of those. A development permit would also be required. And one reason to support more duplexes is that they can provide a more attainable form of home ownership, since the 2 dwelling units can be subdivided into separate real estate entities. This map shows the impact of the proposed amendment, with those lots currently large enough for a duplex shown in orange, and those in red indicate the lots that are 800 square meters or larger that would be affected. So as you can see, most of those are in Brentwood Bay, although there's a couple over near Sandwichton and Turgoose. Next are panhandle lots. Panhandle lots are typically created at the rear of an existing property and accessed by a narrow strip of land as shown in the image with the orange dwelling on it. The creation of any panhandle lot requires council approval, and previously there were no policies that addressed them. Through this project, new policies have identified that although panhandle lots are not the preferred form of development, they are not to be excluded. The proposed amendments include panhandle regulations for all R and RE zones, and to mitigate potential impacts to neighbors, within the urban area, panhandle lots have a slightly smaller lot coverage of 25%, are limited to 1 story or 4.5 meters in height, have a slightly larger side yard setback at 3 meters, and they would not be permitted to have a suite or cottage. Subdivision regulations also now specify access strip requirements. Small lots. Small lots are defined as being 500 square meters or less in area or 15 meters or less in lot frontage or width. Any new small lot created would still need to go through the rezoning process and be approved by council, as well as require a development permit. To reduce impacts from small lots, a minimum lot area of 400 square meters is required to have a suite or cottage. The R1 excess zone, which was created specifically as an infill zone, currently has no minimum lot area. The proposed regulations would establish a 300 square meter minimum lot area that would apply to any newly created lot. Currently, the R1 excess zone includes 2 floor area ratios, which allow for a larger dwelling if there is a suite. This is an unusual scenario, and the proposed amendments would have 1 FAR of 0.5 applied to the R1 excess zone. An FAR of 0.5 is slightly larger than most residential zones, but it would allow for a modest size house to be built on these smaller parcels. During this project, concerns of house size relative to the lot size have been raised. Currently, the size of house permitted is largely determined by the floor area ratio, which is a ratio of the building size relative to the lot size. This means that ultimately, the maximum size of house depends on the actual lot size, which can vary significantly within any given zone. The proposed amendments include a maximum house size within each zone that correlates to the minimum lot area requirement by the floor area ratio plus 20%. This would help establish a pattern of development within a given zone or neighborhood, but still allow for some variation based on lot size. A house size for agriculture zones is also included to reflect provincial regulations. In addition to the amendments specific to the new infill policies, a number of housekeeping amendments are also proposed. Additional amendments are to make regulations more consistent between similar zones, or to improve clarity in definitions, better reflect current practices, or resolve problem regulations that have been identified by staff over the years. Examples of more substantive ones include equally capturing garages or carports in the floor area, increasing the number of unrelated persons in a family from 4 to 6, reducing the rear yard setback from 7.5 to 1.5 meters for non-habitable accessory buildings, allowing wheelchair lifts or accessibility ramps within the required setbacks, and within urban areas, no longer allowing a house to remain in place while a new one is under construction. With any of these new regulations, where any lawfully constructed dwelling would no longer comply with the regulations, they become what we call legal non-conforming, and they can be maintained and repaired over their lifetime. But any new development would need to comply with the regulations. So to help illustrate what the proposed regulations could look like, we contracted a consultant to show potential building mass and siting based on the draft amendments. But the drawings are not at the level of detail that would reflect design or architectural detailing, so keep that in mind. So these slides show some of the illustrations done for cottages in a variety of zones. The hypothetical lots use the minimum lot area and the lot frontage for each zone, and 2 scenarios were done to show either a 2-story dwelling or 1.5-story dwelling, although not all are shown here. So this one shows the R1 and the R1M. And the R1X shown here is a 400 square meter lot, so it is large enough to be able to have a cottage. Otherwise, if it did not have a cottage and only had a single family dwelling, that lot could be reduced to 300 square meters. This slide shows some R2 zones with both the single family dwelling and a cottage option, or with the duplexes. There is a document that shows all the illustrations that are posted on the website if you're interested. So you may be asking yourself, what could my neighborhood look like with this infill? 3 sample blocks for each of Saanich, Brentwood Bay, and Tanner Ridge have been used to see how a variety of infill developments could impact a neighborhood. This slide shows the existing conditions of a block within Saanich, with those highlighted lots being selected for a hypothetical infill scenario, which could look like this. So you can see there's an addition of a couple of duplexes, a number of small lots and cottages using various zones. This image shows a sample block in Brentwood Bay that could look like this. And this block in Tanner Ridge, which tends to have slightly larger lots, could look like this. With a couple of additional duplexes, cottages, and small lots, and this one also includes a panhandle lot towards the left. So what is next in the project? Following the public input we receive at this stage, further revisions would be considered before forwarding a report to council early in the new year with the draft bylaw. Based on council direction, the bylaw may be revised further or advanced to a public hearing, where council would then hear from the public through the formal public hearing process. So thank you for your interest in this project. Again, we invite you to send your input to planning@centralsaanich, and we're happy to entertain your questions. Thank you.
So at this time, if anyone would like to ask a question of Andrea or Jarrett, you could type it into the chat box, or you could click on raise your hand. And since I'm not seeing anyone, you could also just unmute yourself and ask the question if that's easiest for you. And while we wait for some questions to potentially come in, I'm just going to ask Andrea a couple of common questions that we've heard throughout this project. So Andrea, I think the first one would be, what do these changes mean to my property?
Okay, so the amendments that would have the most immediate effect would be that allowing the one-story cottage as an alternative to the suite, as an alternative to a suite. The R1 zone, again, is that exception. Suites, because suites are not usually permitted there. So that would be one change where the development permit would guide how that development happens, but by not requiring a rezoning, it takes away the question of if that rezoning would be approved. But there is still the development permit process to make sure it fits within the context of the neighborhood.
Can I stop you there for 1 second? Because I know you're next going to talk about rural estates, and there's a question about providing more information about large rural lots. So could you maybe review the RE lot and explain how that's a large, oh sorry, actually the question is specifically about large lot residential lots. So not
I understand the question, sorry. Just large lot, a large R-zoned property in the urban area?
Yeah, I believe that's what it is. Susan, if you'd like to unmute yourself, you're welcome to provide more context. But yeah, a large lot, residential lot. So I assume within the urban containment area, a large R lot.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. It just, in the examples provided, you're referring to R1 medium, R1 small, but not a lot about R1 large. So we have like a 3/4 acre lot, and I was just not clear what, in the examples that you provided, none of them were referring to large lot residential, just medium or small, or so I was just curious about that.
Yeah, sorry, the R1 is included. I'll just go back to the slide with, they're shown on that one. So the same regulations would apply to all those R zones around having a cottage. What I would say, if you're looking at, you have a larger property where maybe it's 2 or 3 times the size of the minimum lot area, and you're looking at development opportunities, now the guidelines the policies would point you to some options you could consider, like small lots, converting to a duplex, maybe doing a small lot pocket neighborhood subdivision, or depending on your location, maybe a small scale house conversion to a triplex or fourplex along those lines. So I think the policies speak to more types of infill, but obviously every site would have to look within its context and obviously the interest of the property owner and how they would like to develop their land. So it sounds like you might have more options you could look at than some other lots.
Okay, thank you.
I think you're muted. Hello? Andrea,
Hello?
you're muted.
Andrea's muted. Just telling Andrea she's
I was muted. So that question was about whether there was an up-down duplex permitted on an R1X lot, and there is not permitted. The next question is regarding panhandle lots. So the resident is saying, my current building is towards the back of the lot. Are there restrictions to placing the additional accessory building at the front? Can a small lot be combined with a panhandle format? So 2 questions there for you.
Yes, potentially yes. So if you have a large lot and the house is sited at the rear, and it would work to, let's say your house sits more closely to where the orange house is in this graphic, then yeah, you could certainly carve off a small lot at the front of your house that would, be representative here with the kind of mauve-ish and house on it. So that is definitely an option with panhandles, because as you know, depending on where the existing house is situated will really affect how you can drop your lot lines. But it could go either way.
Thank you.
Okay, we're getting a lot of questions coming in. So the next one, Bradley Watson, if you'd like to unmute yourself, you've raised your hand and you'd like to ask a question, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Hi, Andrea. I just have a question about R1 excess allowing cottages in behind. And we have an R1 excess across the street from us, and we're happy with the design. But my concern is with the surrounding neighbors, if you allow more lot coverage with a cottage in behind on a very small and narrow lot, that's certainly going to impact privacy, natural light, things like that. Why are we allowing a cottage on an already small and very narrow lot?
Yeah, so you've hit a few things there. So to start with, I don't know the lot across from you, so it may not be of the size that would allow a suite. So if it is less than 400 square meters, which some of the existing R1 access lots are, it very well may not be allowed to have a cottage. So that's one threshold test, and it's exactly it recognizes that with really small lots, there's much more constraints on developing and potential more impacts to neighbors. So that is and it wouldn't allow a cottage or a suite. So it kind of keeps it to one household unit. If it is large enough that it could be allowed a cottage, that's where the development permit guidelines really come into play. Cottages on the R1 excess specifically is only 45 square meters, so it's a much smaller cottage than would be allowed in a R1 zone or R2 zone. And it would really have to be designed in a way that is sensitive to the neighbors. So its window placement, where its entrance and outdoor area is. So that's what would be kind of scrutinized through the development permit application process. And it would be very much based on mitigating impacts to neighbors. So there'd be a couple tests there with your particular scenario. First off, to see if that would even be large enough to have a cottage, and if the house has a suite, well, then they can't have a cottage either.
Okay, thanks, Andrea.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming.
Andrea, the next question is, how does this affect newly zoned commercial properties? And if you
Yeah, this would have no effect on commercial properties at this time. We did not change, we're not proposing any zoning changes to the commercial zones beyond some cleanup minor ones. So if you're in a commercial property now, the zoning would be unaffected. And depending on where you're situated, many of our zones, like the C1, does allow for residential uses above, and that would kind of remain in place. But no changes at this time, only to policies. Another?
So the next question is, for a large R1 lot, there are potentially multiple options. How would the owner go about finding out what the best option is and get some perspective on that from the municipality?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it really depends a lot on your own interests and how much you want to be directly involved with your development application process. Certainly, some people are happy to just hire a consultant and kind of let them do an analysis of some very options, and through discussions with you, they would maybe refine it to where your preference is. So that is one early approach. And certainly once people are looking at development options, and if they have some concept plans drawn up, we field questions on those all the time, and would be happy to, give you some feedback if we see any major concerns with any of those approaches. But certainly I would say if you're really wanting to explore an option, sometimes hiring a consultant, such as a surveyor even, to potentially draw up some draft line arrangements for you would be one good starting point. Jared, did you have anything to add on that?
Thank you, Andrea. I think just certainly you're welcome. Anyone's welcome to give us a call and talk through any potential ideas you have on your property. As Andrea mentioned, we certainly welcome all residents to get a hold of us. We do a lot of Zoom meetings like this right now, so that's a great avenue. So it's easy to discuss, have these conversations from your living room with us. So certainly feel free to call us.
Okay, the next question. Regarding R1XS, floor area ratio is proposed to increase to 0.5 compared to previous 0.4 or 0.45. Please explain the reason for increasing the size, as this will affect affordability and impact of green space.
Yeah, actually the R1X right now is 0.5 or 0.6. It's even higher. So it's 0.5 if it's just a single family dwelling, or 0.6 if it contains a suite. So we're eliminating that 0.6 and keeping it at the 0.5. You are right in the sense that is slightly higher than most of our other zones. I'll just go to a summary slide here. So you can see the FARs kind of just towards the left. So most of our zones are 0.4, 0.45, and then we do have a couple of 0.5. So it actually isn't getting any larger for the R1 excess zone. It's getting slightly smaller.
The FAR column is the fourth from the left there. Yes, thank you. Okay, the next question is, how does rezoning impact property taxes? They are currently residential properties, not commercial.
I certainly don't want to answer this and pretending I'm any financial person, but generally rezoning, it would depend on what the rezoning is for. Your property taxes really come down to your assessed value. So if you're rezoned to allow more properties, let's say to allow a subdivision to occur, well, creating multiple lots will obviously increase the tax base, but because you're increasing the number of lots. If you're rezoning to have a change in use, let's say within a commercial zone and you're expanding your uses, that may or may not have a direct impact. it would really depend on how it affects your assessed value. So I would say quite often people think it may have a significant one, but often it really doesn't. But an appraiser could certainly help answer that question a little bit more, how they determine the assessed value. But I would think it's really, if you're creating more lots, there would just be more properties that come into the tax base.
And I expect that if you were adding an accessory, like a cottage to your backyard, then the assessment of your property might increase.
Yeah, potentially, like any improvement to your property. I know appraisers do look at if there have been improvements on a property, and how big the existing house is, how old, the age of the improvements as well. So they they have quite a complex variety of variables they would look at. So hence, I don't want to give any definitive answer.
So it looks like those are all of our questions. Oh, here's one more. With the new bylaws concerning preservation of trees, if a tree has to be removed and must be replaced with 3 in its place, will these small lots be able to accommodate this? Going by sample drawings, big trees appear to be shown on municipal land only.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that applies with any development. Sometimes if a larger development is doing underground parking, sometimes that also reduces opportunities to get a lot of tree placement. So with the proposed bylaw, one option where we would obviously encourage tree preservation first off, replacement when that is feasible. If it's not feasible for that to occur on the lot, then another option would be that they pay us cash in lieu of that. So there would be a tree fund established within the district. So when people can't plant trees, that they would pay, I can't recall if it's $300 or $500, something like that. And we would put that into a fund, and then we could use that money to plant trees within the district. So it could be done as street trees, improved plantings and parks. It could be a number of ways that we could use it to keep maintain our tree canopy throughout the district.
Andrea, could you just repeat the timing of when the regulations are going to council?
At this point, we will expect a report to go early in the new year. So, we'll hear from people over at least the next month or so. Depending on what we hear, we may do some revisions, but at this point, we'd anticipate a report probably in late January or early February. And they would still need to go through a public hearing process.
Thank you. And we have a question from Bradley. Bradley, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
It's Heather.
Hi, it's actually Heather. Andrea, just clarification on that one example you gave when someone has their house set back on their lot and they want to subdivide or develop the front part of the lot. Would there be height restrictions on that new house? So the cottages have to be 1 story in the back. Would you have to be 1 story in the front?
Not, sorry, in a panhandle situation or just in a single family dwelling with a cottage? Yeah,
Yeah.
the height restriction is just to the cottage at 4.5 meters. The house maximums would remain the same, which most are 7.5 or 8 meters for the principal dwelling.
But if the principal dwelling's at the back of the lot, so there's already a 2-story house in the back of the lot, and they want to put a RX1, or the small one, RX1S1 in the front, would that house have to be 1 level, or could it still be potentially have 2 2-story dwellings on that?
Okay, so you're talking when they take a house and it becomes a panhandle lot?
I guess, except that the house is at the front instead of the back.
Yep. So if they were creating a panhandle lot and let's say it was vacant, then yeah, the regulations are that it's a 4.5 meter height, so 1-story house. If somebody has an existing house and they want to make it a panhandle property, then they would have to apply for a variance to allow that. So, that would have to be something that would go to council. They would obviously have the option, if the house was worth keeping and they wanted to keep it and didn't want to modify it, let's say to make it a 1-story house, then obviously they'd need to get that variance approved before the panhandle could be completed.
Okay, well, I guess I always think of a panhandle as something being built behind an existing house, but in this case, it's the house is already there. They have a huge front portion to their lot. so they want to put a house on the front part of the house, of the lot. So that's still considered panhandle?
Yeah, if it's that configuration where they just have a narrow access off the road frontage. So I'll just go back to that diagram again. So in this case, if basically the orange house was the pre-existing house and it was a 2-story house,
Yeah.
and they wanted to create that front lot, yeah, they would need a variance then because it's becoming a panhandle. If it was more traditional, the house was at the front, then the new dwelling build would be limited to that 4.5 meters as well.
Okay.
Andrea, I just want to say one thing directed towards you, Evil, and Jared. I thank you so much for the process. I mean, there's a lot of thought has gone into this, and I love the idea of having these cottages for affordable housing. So I just wanted to give kudos to all 3 of you.
Well, thank you for that. I'd appreciate if you'd put that in writing.
Yes, thank you very much, Bradley.
Yeah, good work. I mean, it's so detailed what you've brought up here, and these cottages are a great alternative for affordable housing and low impact from the street also. So good work.
Thank you.
Okay.
On the topic of panhandle lots, one more question about that. Currently, the OCP does not support panhandle lots. Is that correct?
Currently the OCP is silent on panhandle lots. I know that there's been this perception that panhandle lots have not been supported, but in reality, there hadn't been a panhandle application forwarded to council in a number of years. So there definitely was a policy gap. So that was part of the conversation with the community and council through the earlier parts of this project. And yeah, where they came was they still aren't necessarily seen as the highest and best form of infill development, but in some scenarios they might be suitable and supportable, so they aren't to be excluded. But previously, I should say before, there were no policies on panhandles to say support or not support.
I think that answers the question, but if it doesn't, please feel free to follow up to the person who put forth that question. And I'm going to ask Crystal and Audrey, if you could unmute yourself, you could ask the next question.
Hi there, thank you. What we're looking at is we were asking some of the questions about the rezoning from commercial to, or from residential to commercial. So I think that some of that got lost in translation there. The questions that we're looking at answering is our house is situated in Saanich in the area where they are hoping to acquire our home. So obviously this is a little concerning to us. And what we want to look at is what are the options there for us. Obviously not necessarily related to panhandling or cottages, but more if they're looking to acquire our home to do the 5 stories. Basically, what are our options? Is there any option for staying? Are we basically having to sell? As that's kind of where we're at.
Well, hi, it's Jarrett Matanowicz there. Certainly, your property, you own your property. There's no way that anyone could require you to sell your land, number one. I think you may be referring to the Saanich Village Design Plan that recently was endorsed by council and or official community plan. I'm not quite sure where your property is, but there is some provision and policy to support up to 5 stories in our core areas, right around the core of Saanich Village and Brentwood Bay, as a matter of fact. And really, that's a long-term policy. That's sort of where we see the district being able to accommodate growth and more attainable forms of housing with our limited area. So it's certainly not something that this project or the Saanich Village Design Project would turn around and force you to change your home or be forced to sell your property in any way. It's a long-term vision, which may or may not come to fruition, but it just recognizes an opportunity to accommodate the growth that we anticipate in our community.
Did you have any follow-up questions on that topic?
No, I think that's the main thing we were curious.
So it sounds like you're probably in a scenario where you're well positioned, as a development lot, but not by itself. So quite often developers need to, to do a bigger commercial type of development or even a larger housing development needs to acquire a few lots and consolidate them. So quite often, if you're in a desirable spot, some people get developers knocking on their doors all the time, looking to sell. But as Jared indicated, they can't force you by any means. It might be to your advantage because it means you're in a spot, if you ever decided to sell, you're highly marketable. And you could offer up some people the right of first refusal on a title as well if you were, if they wanted to be the first in line to have an opportunity to purchase, but you can't be forced to.
Thank you.
Well, a couple of the previous people who have asked questions still have their hands up, but I think that might just be that you've left that function on. So if there are no further questions, which it doesn't look like there are. No, there are not. Jared, do you want to just conclude by explaining the next steps here?
Certainly. Thank you very much, first of all, for everybody participating. This has been a good experience, I think, for us as well, hopefully for yourselves. As Andrea mentioned earlier, we did have some open houses planned, but due to safety measures, we did cancel those. This was always scheduled, and we may actually consider doing another one of these in the evening in the next week or two. I think it's been well received, and there may be some folks who are working or whatever and couldn't attend today for whatever reason. Andrea's the slide that's on there now currently has our website as well as an email address, planning@csanich.ca. And so we are keeping this engagement open for several more weeks, perhaps into the early new year, where we're receiving feedback from the public. Actually, it will actually be well into the new year because there will be a public hearing involved where the community members have an opportunity to come before council and discuss, voice any concerns or any support that there may be for this overall project and the land use bylaw amendments. So please visit our website. There's a wealth of information on there about this project, about the various types of housing forms, and it gets into substantial detail if you're interested in knowing how this may affect your property or your neighborhood in general. You can email us with any feedback, any questions you have, and we'd be happy to respond and provide any clarification as we go forward. So just thank you very much again for your participation, and have a good day.
Yes, thank you, everybody.
And lastly, I just wanted to remind anyone who missed the first couple of minutes of the presentation that we have been recording this session. If you have any concerns about that, please do email us in the next few days. Otherwise, we will be posting it online so that those who weren't able to join us can watch it at their convenience. Thanks again. It was nice hearing from all of you, and we miss talking to you in person and look forward to it again in the future.